So welcome again. This is the session on talking about race and racial justice with children and young adults. We're just waiting for some of our attendees to sign in. If you have a few moments, you can read the panelist bios and access our racial justice resources on our website, www.umass.edu/education/homecoming-2020. And Marisa just shared the link too. So we have more folks filing in, but I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Greetings, I'm Cindy Gerst-Pepin, Dean of the College of Education here at UMass, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our Education Showcase talking about race and racial justice with children and young adults, and to introduce our moderator and panelists. Our moderator, Jamila Liscott, aka Dr. J, is a community engaged scholar, nationally renowned speaker, and author of Black Appetite, White Food, Issues of Race, Voice, and Justice Within and Beyond the Classroom. She currently serves as Assistant Professor of the Social Justice Education Program at the College of Education, where she is the co-founder and co-director of the Center for Racial Justice and Youth Engaged Research, and co-editor of the highly acclaimed Journal of Equity and Excellence in Education. Dr. J is most well known for being featured on TED.com, where her TED Talk, 3 Ways to Speak English, has been viewed over 4.5 million times. She has been invited to over 100 institutions throughout the nation, where she works closely with youth, educators, and communities to disrupt racial inequalities and enact a vision-driven justice. Now I want to turn our attention to our panelists. Our first member, Associate Professor of Language, Literacy, and Culture in the College of Education, Dr. Maria Jose Botello, who conducts research in critical multicultural analysis of children's and young adult literature. Her research challenges researchers, teacher educators, and teachers to reconsider how multicultural children's literature and other texts are studied in elementary and secondary schools. Dr. Botello is particularly interested in how school literacy practices can be reimagined to affirm children's cultural and linguistic knowledge. Her current research explores how critical literacies, multiliteracies, and Waldorf language arts pedagogies converge and diverge in the research literature and in Waldorf-inspired and democratically organized public schools. Lastly, she is studying how critical collaborative inquiry and ethnographic research practices hold great promise for the professional learning of experienced and pre-service teachers. Dr. Kofi Chiru Nat Turner is a community engaged scholar, dynamic mindfulness facilitator, and ceaseless seeker of knowledge who embodies the qualities of a global ambassador of love. Dr. Turner is an associate professor of teacher education and curriculum studies in the College of Education and has headed the doctoral concentration of language literacy and culture, which includes programs in bilingual education, ESL, multicultural education, and reading and writing. Dr. Turner is prolific at conceptualizing ways of engaging youth, K-12 teachers, and university community partnerships, and in advocating and organizing for racial justice and reparations in education. And for the past 4 years, he has done direct engagement with primarily African American and Latinx students in juvenile injustice settings in New Jersey. A teacher's teacher, Dr. Turner is a learner practitioner of the Raja Yoga tradition across multiple global contexts and has received degrees in educational administration at Harvard University and Africana Studies, political science at Brown University, as well as a PhD from the University of California, Berkeley. Dr. Musella Runel Hall is an alum of UMass Amherst and is Vice President for Student Life, Dean of Students and lecturer in religion at Mount Holyoke College. Trained in the interdisciplinary field of social justice education as both a practitioner and scholar, Dr. Hall has authored numerous books, articles, and curricula on topics of popular culture, friendship, race, spirituality, and critical pedagogy. Most recently co-authoring the book, Uncommon Bonds, Women Reflect on Race and Friendship with Kersha Smith, and a chapter on parenting mixed-race children in biracial families, crossing boundaries, blending cultures, and challenging racial ideologies. Dr. Hall is an advisory board member for Embracing Race and serves on the board for the Holyoke Children's Museum. Hall is a white mom dedicated to anti-racist pro-liberation parenting, raising 2 young daughters who identify as Black and mixed in Western Mass with her partner. And now one of our special featured guests, Aaliyah Zoe Hall, is a 10-year-old entertainer and community builder who created her own social media web series during quarantine. It's terrific, you should check it out, called Dreamland with Aaliyah, where she has read over 200 stories and raised over $10,000 for various nonprofits. Aaliyah believes representation matters and that kids should always have a voice, especially as it relates to conversations about race and racism. She has been featured on multiple media outlets, including Mass Appeal, 1010 Wins, NPR, NBC Universal, The Drew Barrymore Show, and will be on the upcoming Nickelodeon Kid of the Year show. She loves TikTok, Apple products, the Babysitter's Club, graphic novels, hanging out with her sister and best friends, and making memories with her family. You can check out the panelist bios and link to the racial justice resources we've cultivated together at our website, www.umass.edu/education/homecoming/2020. Also, this webinar is going to be recorded and we will post the recording in the coming days on our website. Thank you for attending this session. It shows your commitment to supporting a more just world. I'll now turn it over to Dr. Lee Scott to get us rolling.
Thank you, thank you. First of all, welcome everyone to this just really amazing and important event in this social moment. I want to say first that especially as a Black woman faculty member, I am just filled with gratitude that the leadership of the college has taken this step. And I know that beyond just this moment of hosting an event, there are structural approaches to making sure that the call for racial equity and justice is being addressed and prioritized at the college. And so I just want to express that gratitude. I want to express gratitude for being in the company of such brilliance. And I know you're all going to learn from in a moment. And to all of you, each and every one of you, for showing up. We know that showing up is part of the work, and the expectation is that you take, we don't show up and then check off there's no check box. Like, I showed up, I did the racial justice panel, right? We go out into the systems, into the spaces where we have influence, and we make and demand change, right? And so just grateful for you being present. So before we jump in and witness and learn from all of this brilliance, I'm gonna share some guiding assumptions, because we're all coming to this conversation from different places and spaces, physically, emotionally, different racial identities, different social identities that shape the way that we approach the question of racial justice and racial equity, especially in this country. And so there are some guiding assumptions that you all need to be cued in on for this conversation. The first is that racism is a system, not just an event, right? So we're not limiting our conversation to racial acts, right? We're talking about the systemic framing of race, the structural condition of racism that impacts people across different areas of life, right? So this is not just about someone said something that was racist, someone, had a white hood on. It's not just those acts. We want you to understand that along with that, this kind of racism that we're talking about, both explicitly at the microaggressive level, is embedded in the very fabric of American society. So we're not talking about something that just exists in some areas, in some parts of the country, maybe here or maybe there, that the very fabric and foundation of our society is grounded in racism. And that means something for the way that it'll be spoken about today. The other thing is that racism cannot really accurately be understood out of an intersectional lens. The idea of intersectionality was brought to us and conceptualized by our sister Kimberly Crenshaw, which acknowledges that at all times there are interlocking systems of power at work, right? So there's never just racism, right? There's racism and sexism and classism and other isms and other systems of power that are working together, and they have unique impact on each and every one of us based on our social locations along the lines of privilege and oppression, okay? The next thing is that this is not gonna be a damage-centered conversation. We're having a conversation about racial injustice. We're not having a conversation that exploits the pain and the wounds of Black, Indigenous, and people of color. We're having a conversation that calls out those very systems that I named before, right? So rather than speaking of the gruesomeness of the impact of racism, we're focused on also the systems that are causing the problem. And that's a really important shift in orientation. And then lastly, and probably most importantly in many ways, this conversation will not center on whiteness. A lot of times when we have conversations about racial justice, we tend to center the questions, the needs, the concerns, the comfort of the white folks in the conversation. And so, but we want to acknowledge that Black, Indigenous, and people of color have entirely different conversations about race and racial justice with their children than white parents and caregivers do, right? White parents, caregivers, educators, and they do so from a completely different socio-emotional standpoint. So this conversation is not going to center on the concerns, the needs, and the comfort of whiteness. That's really important. All right, next thing. We have a community chat box. We want to make sure that this chat box is a space for building community and engaging substantively in this experience. For me, like, I'm from the Black church and from hip hop culture, so I like the shared energy, right? That's culture right there, that's love. But we want to make sure that the chat box mirrors the values of love, justice, joy, affirmation, and inquiry that we're committed to in the college broadly and also in this conversation. So feel free to interact in that space. But if the chat box is distracting for you, because we understand that that can be very overwhelming while you're trying to hear different people speak, please feel free to minimize it. You have that option in the upper right-hand corner. There should be a drop-down arrow that allows you to do that. And there's also, finally, there's a separate chat box for Q&A. So we don't want your questions to get lost in that chat box. We know you might be hyped, engaged, excited, and just type something up. But if you want us to make sure to regard your question, please put it in the Q&A box. And we will do our best to honor as many as time permits, but we will not get to all of them, okay? But ask away, because this conversation does not start it in here. Okay, that's enough of me. I want to hear from our amazing panelists. And I'm going to begin with a question for everyone. I will ask a few questions of each of you, and then we'll open up the conversation so that folks who are here can throw in some questions of their own. And just like right off the topic, the topic of this panel, I'd like for each of you to touch on what are effective ways to introduce the topic of race and racial justice to young children in both family settings and school settings. And just to reiterate what I shared before, I asked this acknowledging that young children who are Black, Indigenous, or of color experience the introduction of race and racial injustice very differently from white children and families, right? And then there are other orientations or social identities that might impact that. So let's make sure that that's a part of it. But again, the question is, what are effective ways to introduce race and racial justice to young children in both family settings and school settings? And we can have anyone begin.
All right, we can start. Okay, sure. Aaliyah, go ahead. Okay. One thing is that Black history shouldn't and doesn't start with slavery. And one other thing I wanted to say is that a lot of my white friends, their family doesn't, like, I'm not able to talk about the race and racism with them because their family doesn't teach them about it. And I can't like talk about like some like a microaggression that might have happened at the grocery store, because they're not educated and they don't know about that. So that's one thing that I want to share.
Well said, Aaliyah. Well said. And I think for us and our family, obviously, you know, we have high value on reading. It's been an important part of our family, and we try really hard to choose books. So that's a place where we started a lot of conversations, both you know, books that felt representative, but then books that didn't. So, you know, where we could really use some of that critical literacy skill. So that's my training in terms of social justice education and critical literacy, and all of that is that work around, you know, being able to see yourself reflected, but then also being able to point out when something is problematic or not representative. And so I think for us, it's about understanding the history. It's about choosing good materials to start the conversation. And it's also about expectations in relationship. Those would be some of the places we would start.
And then the graph.
Yeah, you want to talk about that?
So there was a graph about all picture books, and basically, and 2/3 of all picture books have the main character is either an animal or a white person. And really, like in our family, probably like almost all of the books that we read, the main character is a person of color. And so that's just, and the thing that's also crazy is that more than half of all children are kids of color. So that is crazy that the books are like that, and that you really need representation in books like that.
Thank you so much for that response. Like very, very powerful and illuminating offerings to us. Let's have another panelist please jump in and add some layers to what was just shared, please.
Hello. Thank you, Aaliyah and Marcella. And I wanted to begin by saying that we all need to be brave in this place because we need to show our children and youth how to participate in a multiracial, multilingual, and multicultural democracy. And to do that work, we as the adults in their lives need to show how that's done. And I think it's important for us to also understand that, you know, in terms of differences, you know, babies can distinguish skin color and hair texture early on. And by 2.5, children notice differences. But around 4 or 5, that's when certain values are being attributed to those differences. And so children learn biases, and children of color, they begin, if not earlier than 4, they feel that deep discrimination that comes with those values around race. And so I think it's so important for us as adults to create a space for children's respectful curiosity, and to have very open conversations with them. And to, and if we don't know how to have those conversations, to practice them, you know, to try them out with other adults, and to try them out when you're in the room by yourself, but also to have the conversations and to make mistakes. And then to share with our children and our youth that we've made a mistake and that we need to learn more. And in that learning, we're showing that this is ongoing work. And this takes a responsibility and commitment over time. We don't just, you know, it doesn't just happen, you know, overnight, and dealing with these very deep issues that are very much part of all of our fabric in this country and really around the world. And so this work, you know, needs to be ongoing, and we need to be aware of our own biases. And we know too well that actions speak louder than words. And so if our children and if our youth see us, you know, and critically engaged with how we see the world and how we are in the world and how we interact and are with different groups of people, then, you know, that is teaching them that this is ongoing work, ongoing struggle. And I can also, I would love to piggyback on Aaliyah's and Marcella's, you know, pitch for books. And so in terms of this kind of work, certainly books can play an important part. They can be mirrors, they can be windows, mirrors, and reflecting our children's experiences and families' experiences. They can be windows and expanding those experiences, and they can be doors and where we can sort of slide through with our imagination into these worlds that books can create. I do want to come back to those metaphors later on in our discussion, but they do play a part. And certainly books, stories that children can explore and how to be allies to each other, stories about resistance and social action. Children come to learn about mobilizing and working together to create social change. All of these kinds of storylines need to be part of our reading diet. And those books are available.
Thank you so much. You know, I'm hearing so far that, you know, white adults, you got to talk to young people about race, right? Because students of color, young people of color don't have the option, right? I'm hearing that representation matters, that modeling vulnerability matters, right? That taking the risk, even practicing and being self-aware and understanding what it means to nurture and nourish the curiosity of young people, because those biases are coming in very early. So we have to have these conversations. Nat Turner, I know you got some gems to drop. Can you share with us some more about effective ways to introduce race and racial justice to young children and young adults in both family and school settings?
Right on, right on. So thank you for everyone who organized the panel. And of course, to the moderator, Jamila, thank you for hosting us. And the first thing I'll just say, just by way of acknowledging the land we are on, if we're talking about racial justice, is just that this is indigenous land we all are sitting on if we're in this United States of America. And I just want to just put that out there just as a way of, you know, respecting and acknowledging that fact. And then going to the answer your question, I'm going to talk later about mindfulness, but to me, this is one of the tools to get to kids early in a process of humanizing all of us. So once we humanize ourselves, we're much less likely to dehumanize another human being. So for me, that's one of the fundamental things that I work on and teach, and I'm going to talk, hopefully, if we have a shot at this, more about that in a second. But the one lesson I would like to share is from my mother, who's a white woman. So my father is African-American and my mother is European-American, but my mother raised me mostly. And what she taught me from the beginning was to have a critical race ideology. And this is a concept that actually some of my friends at Harvard came up with, Dorinda Carter and Darren Graves. But what she told me, she explained how, you know, white supremacy is running in all of our veins and is infiltrated many of our minds. But she wanted to encourage me to and know that I was going to have to do, you know, work twice as hard, and that the system would be looking at me more as a token or a tool to further to continue their system of white supremacist, capitalist, hetero, cis patriarchy. But she said, you go in and utilize and learn what you can from it. And then, just outdo the system. So, but teaching kids up front what the system is that they're up against and confronting, I think is a very powerful thing. And what those researchers at Harvard found were that high achieving Black students, parents had given them this critical race achievement ideology. It showed the obstacles that they might face in the future and showed them ways to navigate it and get over it and around it. So, and then I'll just dovetail on Marcella, Aaliyah, and Maria Jose's point about history, world history. My parents from day one had books about all the countries in the world, all the peoples in the world, and it just humanized everyone in the world so that we're all on the same level as human beings. Versus, again, the media that we get here or the books that we get here are just about pretty much white people. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And shout out to you for citing your mama first before you got to them Harvard scholars. He was like, I'm gonna cite my mom who taught me this. That's what's up. The knowledge comes from everywhere, and that's critical. Thank you for that wisdom. Before I jump into the individual questions, I'm curious about how do we have these conversations, right? These are effective ways, but how do we have these conversations that in a way that's not from a damage-centered place, right? I work with a lot of young people, Black, Indigenous, and students of color who are just like, yo, I'm sitting in class and the conversation is like, so you were slaves. And this is the beginning of the conversation, right? And I know Aaliyah touched on that earlier, but having these conversations usually is fraught with the tension of what is happening, especially in this social moment, which is essentially like racial trauma, right? So how do we have these important conversations about the racial trauma, about the issues of racism without using that damage-centered starting point? And everyone doesn't have to answer, but I just wanted to, throw that out for folks who might have some thoughts.
We could weigh in for a second. I mean, I think there's a lot of interpersonal work that needs to happen around humility and vulnerability. And I think that when it comes to the power differential that's baked into adults and children, there's already an opportunity there to think about the ways that we show up when kids ask questions. Because there's so much natural curiosity that children have about difference, about history, about fairness, about equity. I mean, I think that just ask a kindergartner about somebody taking something that doesn't belong to them, or putting themselves on somebody else's mat that they were there first, right? They're going to get that right away. That's a pretty transferable way that then you can talk about colonialization and other aspects of history when you're ready to scaffold it that way, right? But I think that the important part is validating children's interest, but validating in a way that feels really authentic and comes from a place of you've been doing your own work. There is no way to show up in these conversations if you haven't been engaged in the unlearning of your own work, particularly for white people, particularly for white educators, white parents, white adults, engaging with all kids around these conversations. I taught Aaliyah recently the term gaslighting. And we've been using that to talk about sometimes what feels like gaslighting, right? This feeling of like your experience is not real or not valid, and I'm just gonna because I said so, right? and that's not effective. So I guess just the humility part, the vulnerability, the commitment that this is going to be lifelong work, and then finding ways to make it really centered on equity and lived experience, so that it feels like it's a holistic conversation. Want to add anything to that?
I'm sure there have definitely been times that I don't know if this has definitely happened, but I'm sure that there's been times that I've been with one of my friends and or he or she will say something like why did that person, why did this happen to that person, not that person? And then their parents will be like, shh, no, we're not talking about that right now. That's not I'm not really, it's not like the kids are just interested in that, but really the parents just aren't ready to talk about that and haven't really developed a way to talk about that on their own. So it's not the kids' fault, it's the parents.
You better preach. Yes. Tell them, sis. Thank you so much. Dropping wisdom. Do we have maybe one other panelist who feels like they have something to offer around that question?
I think I think what's so important, and I've worked with really young children and young adults and those in between, is really to be open to their questions and to really understand what they don't know, and what they might already think about race. And so assessing all of that through the questions, the conversations, the deep, relationships that, we have with one another, and that we can't always answer all the questions that they have, but you need to show a commitment to learning with your student, with your child, with your youth, to figure out what those answers might be.
Yeah, that's really amazing advice. You know, I know I work with young people who basically feel like their voice is not even a part of the conversation. They're like, anytime I'm taught anything about race or racial justice, I'm taught about someone who looks like me that overcame something painful, right? Like everything is all about overcoming. I'm not learning about a variety of people, and they have thoughts and they have questions and they have needs. And if invited, they can offer that as a starting point for the conversation, so we don't just start anywhere we want, you know? So thank you so much. And that actually transitions really well into my question, which is for Aaliyah. And Aaliyah, I want to know, like, do you know of any examples? Can you share examples of when you felt like adults got it right when speaking to young people about race, and some examples of when you felt like adults fell short of that?
I actually have, two things prepared. So recently, my teacher this year, she has been so good about talking about race and racism in our classroom. And she's been talking about it in such a comfortable way, which really like makes me feel like amazing. And we have been doing voting projects on like for a public service announcement. And in our voting project, she assigned us to like certain topics. So me and my friend, we got picked to do women of color voting. And that was what our slideshow was about. But she was so good with giving us so many good resources. And she's a white teacher. So she was so good. Like she had so many resources. She was emailing us every day about it. And that was a really good experience for me. A not so great experience was when I was in my class and we were talking about our heritage and where our family was from. So we were all like raising our hands and my teacher called on me and I said that I was from the Caribbean and from Barbados and St. Kitts and Nevis on my dad's side. And on my mom's side, I was from Ireland. And we had actually gone to Ireland last summer. And I was really excited about that. And he wasn't really as excited about it, of course, but it was okay. And then after my friend Ellie, she raised her hand and she's white and she said that she was from Ireland too. And then my teacher said, well, I could tell that you might be from Ireland because of your pale skin and your blue eyes. And that was right after he had just called on me. And that was a time that I just felt really sad and it just made me feel like bursting into tears. So, yeah.
Wow. Thank you so much for that level of vulnerability and even sharing that here. And I'm just so moved to know that you have a home environment that makes sure that you're equipped with what you need so that those things don't have to phase you, right? Like, I love that. They don't have to phase you in a long-term way, but there are other young children, right? Who, if we don't get this right, if we don't do this work and show up right, the damage, right, is unimaginable. And so, Marcella, seeing as you are very much at the helm of this beautiful home that is, you know, gifting us with the wonder of Aaliyah, I have a question for you about how people enter into this conversation. So many people entering into these conversations do so with complex emotions. We know that it's not light. So for white parents, caregivers, educators, there may be shame or guilt attached to conversations about race. And for Black, Indigenous, and people of color speaking with children about race, they might naturally come with frustration, apathy, other valid emotions, right? What can you offer parents, educators, caregivers as they consider how their own experiences and awareness plays into conversations with children about race and racial justice?
Well, I think for one thing, you know, in even in the way you framed the question, the acknowledgement that it is heavy and complex and different depending on your social identities and life experience is a really important place to start. I think that there have been a lot of white parents of white children for a long time that have thought the conversations about race have nothing to do with them. Right? That it's like someone else's conversation, you know, and like even when things were happening just this summer, you know, people were saying things to me like, oh, I'm so sorry that, you know, your family is going through that. I'm like, no, we're all going through this. We're all in this conversation, you know, and that's really important. They might look different. The conversations might look different, of course, but we're all in the conversation, the meta conversation, or if we're not, we need to be. So I think in terms of how you approach it, that it is complex, that it is actually nuanced, and that you are going to go through a range of emotions, and you're going to feel embarrassed, and you're going to make mistakes, and you're going to want to give up, and you're going to go back to your bubble of not having to think or talk about it. But there's such a loss to all of our humanity, particularly when white adults make that choice, because it diminishes their humanity, our humanity, everyone's humanity, right? We all need to be able to show up and fully participate. So what does that look like? Looks like lots of different things for all of us, right? Could be therapy, could be meditation, yoga, could be classes, could be art. There's a lot of ways you can work through your emotions that are applicable here. But the point is that you need to do that so that you can keep showing up and not work out your stuff on children that you're, you know, engaged with, or other people that are in your life that are in a more vulnerable position.
Ooh, that's real talk. We can't give people what we don't have within ourselves, right? Thank you so much for sharing that. I want to turn the conversation over to you, Nat Turner, around this, the role of mindfulness. So mindfulness is just like booming, right? It's just like really peaked in popular culture and mainstream culture, and the idea of it, and in terms of its role in self-care, in personal development, is huge. But you've undertaken in a big way the role of mindfulness in education and in this work that we're speaking about here today. So can you share with us what role does or can mindfulness play in conversations about race and racial justice with young children and young adults?
Okay, yes. Thank you, Dr. J. And yeah, I want to just build on what Marcella was just saying about the different identities that we come with, right? And how we enter this differently. So for me, this is a part of my lived reality. And for many of my students, this is part of their lived reality. So there's no real explanation I necessarily need to do regarding sort of racial injustice in their lives. And the feeling of not being safe, okay? So that is something that young people who have this browner skin in this United States have to sort of deal with the threat that comes against them from white body supremacy. So, and that can be found, that white body supremacy can be found in all of our bodies, because we're all exposed to this coming at us so much. So where mindfulness comes in is it can be used as a tool to help our bodies to feel safe, to help us feel safe in our own bodies, and to build resiliency. Like Leah was just saying, her mom is building up that resiliency so that when things come at her, it doesn't like tear her apart, but she has some strength to challenge it. Okay, and so then I want to just share this book here with you all. This book has blown my mind. It's on the link, on the social justice resources link for this event. But Resmaa Menakem, he combines two things that I've been thinking about my whole life, right? So white supremacist, capitalist, hetero, cis patriarchy on one hand is sort of how we intellectualize and understanding the interlocking systems of oppression, the intersectionality, if you will, that Dr. J alluded to, coming from Kimberly Crenshaw. But in addition to that, the fact of the matter is we cannot intellectualize our way out of white body supremacy because it lives in our veins. We are the people, our ancestors went through all of the sort of the violence that happened on this land. And so in order to heal this, Resmaa, in this book, he has a lot of different exercises, very similar to the exercises that I share around dynamic mindfulness of how to heal our bodies and metastasize some of the trauma that's in all of our bodies, so that then we have more capacity for empathy and to support others and share this. Finally, I just want to actually share a bit of this practice with everyone here who's on the call. And I brought along a little chime here. And I'll just tell you the 3 parts of this practice that I lead in Jersey City and in the College of Education and across the university and the nation. It has 3 parts: centering, which I'm going to do with this chime, breathing, and movement. And the centering helps us focus on the present moment so that, you know, depression may be in the past and anxieties in the future, but peace is in the present. And also breathing helps regulate our emotions. And then finally, the movement, as I said earlier, it metastasizes trauma that's stored in the body and gets it out of our body. And so that we're not holding on to it and then re-traumatizing other people or blowing trauma through other people's bodies. We're dealing with it in our own body. And that is sort of the first step to ending the cycle of intergenerational trauma that we're in. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to just invite everyone to get comfortable. Maybe sit up tall in your chair with the crown of your head up toward the ceiling. Notice any sensations in your body from your day so far. Invite you with your hands to relax your hands up or down on your lap. Just let them relax from all the emails and texts you may have been doing all day. And with your eyes, I'm going to invite you to lower your gaze by looking down. And if you feel comfortable, you can close your eyes as you're the safety of your own home. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to ring this chime and I'm going to invite you to listen to it as long as you can. And when you can no longer hear it, I invite you to raise your hand. Beautiful. So that chime was just for all of us in this room and for all of our happiness and peace. But let's send another chime to all of our family members, friends, our inner circle affected by these multiple crises that we're facing at the same time, from coronavirus, our health, from the economic fallout, and from systemic racism. Let's just ring it one more time for everyone in our circle, all of our loved ones. Beautiful. And the climate, that's right. The climate and the democratic crisis. And the third chime we're going to ring is for Breonna Taylor's family in Louisville, Kentucky, who's seeking justice, George Floyd's family, and all the people in the world affected by these pandemics and crises that we're all facing. Let's just send love and light out to the world. One more time. Okay, beautiful. So that is our centering, our focus on this present moment. Now I just want to lead a quick breathing exercise. So I'm going to just invite everyone to take 3 deep breaths together. Take a big inhale through your nose and exhale through your mouth. One more inhale and exhale through your mouth. Beautiful. And what I'm going to show you right now is deep belly breathing. What happens with this is that if we can get air into our stomach, it sends a signal to our ancient lizard brain that's responsible for fight, and freeze, that we're safe. And so I want to just invite you to try deep belly breathing. So I invite you to bring your right hand to your belly if that feels comfortable. Maybe you bring your left hand to your heart if that feels okay for you. And the idea here is to inhale through the nose. See if you can make the belly expand like a balloon. So inhale, belly's expanding. Exhale, belly contracts. 2 more. Inhale and exhale. Last one. Inhale and exhale. Excellent. And for the final one, I just want to show you something for public school students. For all students who have to sit in classrooms a lot, they say, a lot of teachers say, you know, for Black and brown kids, you can't get up, you don't get out of your seat, or you go into the, the principal's office. But one of the things is, you know, we need to move our bodies, and it's really important. And so this one, students can do in their chair without ever leaving their desk or whatever, but it can release a lot of our attention. So this is a twist, a seated twist. So I'm invite you to take a big inhale in the middle, then grab the back of your chair, exhale and twist. Again, inhale in the middle. Grab the back of your chair and exhale, twist the other way. 2 more, inhale. twist. Last one, inhale and twist. And can I just have people just pop into the chat how you're feeling right now after that? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nat Turner, for inviting us to think about the mind-body connection, right? As you said, this is not work that can just be intellectualized. That's not going to do it. We know that this kind of collective trauma lives in our body. And this social moment that we're living in, this divisive social moment, is playing out on all of us. So we need to really consider what it's doing to our children, right? And in the bodies of our children in the everyday. So thank you so much for modeling that, because I know a lot of people hear the word mindfulness thrown around a lot and really have not seen or witnessed or experienced models for actually engaging in that practice. So thank you. And Maria Jose, I will pitch the next question your way. You know, the 45th occupant of the White House just recently banned critical race theory from federal spaces. The vice president of this country just looked in the camera of a national television with both eyes and said that there is no structural racism problem in our justice system. And those of us who have showed up, we showed up because we know better, right here into this conversation. And so for you, I'm curious about when we do witness structural and interpersonal racism that does very much exist in our institutions, in our world, in our everyday lives, what is the responsibility of the parent, caregiver, educator, when they become aware of this, when we witness this? And can you offer some explicit examples of how these forms of racism might show up in school contexts? Oh, you're still on mute.
Thank you, Dr. J. Sorry about that. Yeah, so I've reflected on this question quite a bit, and I'm going to be addressing both structural racism and interpersonal racism, just what that looks like in schools, because I think it's important for us to name what that looks like. So again, as adults, we have a social responsibility to struggle for racial justice in our schools and communities. And as parents and educators, we need to stand in solidarity with our Black, Indigenous, and students of color and their families and communities. The way I think of it is all children are our children. And when I say children, I mean all the way through high school. I would never call a high schooler a child, but I think in this setting, I want to evoke that role that we have by saying a child is that as adults, we have a responsibility to them. I appreciate what Ibram Kendi says about racism, and that it happens between and among people, and that it's dynamic. And so that racist thinking and practices and policies are choices that we have made as people, as societies over time. And so it is our responsibility to interrogate structural racism. And one of the ways that it manifests itself in schools is through the curriculum. And so these are some questions that are coming out from the second book project that I'm working on, and where teachers can critically read their English language arts practices. But to ask themselves these questions: how do these choices and practices position our students and their families and communities? What do they communicate about them? What counts as learning in my classroom? What and whose knowledge is seen as valuable? What and whose views do we present or represent? Whose views are not represented? What are students learning about participating in the classroom, community, etc.? What can we do and not do? How might our students' lived experiences, interests, and/or inquiries inform our curriculum making? How else might our lesson be taught? Curriculum units be redesigned? And what resources might support us in this work? And so it's so important for us, to really think about the curriculum, because there are so many misrepresentations, underrepresentations, invisibility in the curriculum that we need to address. In terms of interpersonal racism, hold on, I'm sorry. I had generated quite a lengthy list of, in terms of structural racism and just those examples in schools. If you, I wanted just to share that list. It's quite long, but it's so important for us to name all of these ways that structurally racism lives in our institutions. And so, for example, children as young as preschool, Black children are more likely to be suspended from preschool settings. If we look in terms of languages and literacies, which ones are valued and not valued in schools? I gave you a curriculum example, but also the books and other curriculum materials we use, and which, you know, who's present, who's not. The ways that we discipline in terms of our zero tolerance policies and practices that mandate predetermined consequences. So very punitive ways that we discipline our students. And so that, in some scholars call it, is really a pushing out practice of students, which also contributes to the school prison pipeline. The ways that we assess students and place students, so standardized tests, they're culturally biased. We've known that for years and years and years, but we continue to use these ways of assessment and very high stakes assessments. The ways that we place students in gifted and talented and special ed programs, who's in these programs and who's who's not in these programs. The ways that we counsel students in terms of, you know, life choices after high school. The ways that students access college, you know, who's prepared and who's not. The ways that we hire, you know, faculty for schools. We notice a pattern that in poor communities, typically hire unlicensed or less experienced teachers. Funding structures in this country are absurd. They're based on our tax, on property tax. In other countries where you see more equality across schools, there is a flat funding across, you know, districts. So the list, I mean, it's not an exhaustive list, but those are some of the ways that racism is structurally in place and in the institution of schools. In terms of at the interpersonal level, you had asked, you know, what might that look like? And certainly we see, you know, that in terms of, you know, the micro interactions between students, between teachers and students. We see in terms of how language is used, different kinds of social practices, pedagogical practices, biased jokes, the ways that social media is used, nonverbal taunts. So all of these ways are examples of interpersonal racism. And certainly in terms of what should we be doing as adults in these spaces is that we need to, you know, interrupt these instances, and we need to denounce these acts. We need to support targeted students. We need to learn more about the interactions that took place. We need to promote healing, and we need to plan for more learning together. And this needs to be part of the curriculum. The curriculum needs to be part of what we are living and not something else that we add to each school day.
Okay, drops mic. I love it. Just dropped mic. Thank you. That, you know, what you're sharing here is such a crucial reframing, right? Because many of us come into this conversation like, how can we get students of color to stop failing? But you're inviting us to see that it's the institutions that are failing students of color, right? So how do we get the institutions to stop failing our children? How do we stop failing our children? By being complicit with institutions that are bent on failing our children, and not look at it the other way around. Thank you so much for those very explicit examples. Aaliyah, did you have something you wanted to contribute? Did I see your hand up?
Good, you can okay. So one time my dad and I were walking down on the sidewalk. We were in Martha's Vineyard, and I was wearing one of my favorite shirts. It said, "I am Black History" on it. And I And then an older white man stopped me and said, oh, yes, I really believe in that. And I was like, wait, I looked at my shirt. I was like, oh. And he was just like, oh, I really believe in that. Yes, yes, yes. I love that. And I was like, thank you, I guess, because I can validate myself on that kind of thing. And I just remember getting home from bringing the food home and just and I was telling you and Ava, you guys were like,
yeah. Aaliyah wanted to share that anecdote about like what it's like sometimes when people try and it's like validation not necessary. Like it was good.
I love it. I love it. Yes, I can validate myself. Thank you. Right. I just really appreciate that anecdote. And I invite everyone to take what they will from it, but just know Aaliyah is self-validated. Thank you. I appreciate that. And just because we know that this conversation, so listen, where I'm from, right, like 2 blocks away from my hometown in Brooklyn, there is a Black Lives Matter street sign painted down like 3 blocks of street. We've seen that happen all over the place. We've seen the announcements. We've seen the press releases. We've seen all of that. But we know that just languaging your the idea that you are an ally or a co-conspirator is not the same as substantive change. And we know that this panel, this conversation is not the end all be all. And so we want to also ask of you panelists, what kind of resources and books and media and language, like what can folks in this conversation draw on to do the sustainable work beyond the moment of this conversation?
Yeah, if I can just jump in there, is again, I'm talking about mindfulness, and Dr. J, you had a nice critique of the movement in general right off the top as just sort of behaving more calmly and accepting this system for longer and longer and longer. And that is the antithesis of what sort of I'm teaching. And just to give you a quick example of in New Jersey, in the school I work in, those students have been sort of pushed out of all the other high schools. And in some cases, there's a sort of lockup facility where I lead this practice, and I have some of the more advanced students teaching the other students. But I asked them this question that we're grappling with tonight. How do we link mindfulness with Black liberation and their own liberation? How do we link the two? And these students had the brilliant idea that said, hey, why don't we go out in front of this police department here in Jersey City where they've been shooting us, and let's lead the practice right in front of the police department to show them a view of who we are and to humanize us. And I said, wow, that was heavy. I was like, okay. And in my leading of the practice weekly on Thursdays at 1 o'clock, we do the practice, and then we have the conversation of how do we utilize this practice to challenge systemic anti-Black racism. And so we cultivate a lot of sort of ideas and sort of actions that we might take collectively to do this work.
Thank you so much. It sounds like one of the resources is like really from the minds and the power and the genius of the young people that you're working with, right? Just like learning from them as a valid and legitimate resource of how to do this. You going to go read from some academic scholar who never set foot in their community. You learn from those young people. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Other panelists about resources, media, texts, like what are ways that we can draw from beyond this conversation?
I can go next. Aaliyah's taking a stretch break right now. She's been in remote school all day. She's taking a little stretch break right here in the room. I would say there was a question in the chat about how to engage. I think there was 2 different questions about white parents and white kids, and then white people more broadly in this conversation. So I want to answer your question 2 ways. First, starting with Barbara Love and her work around liberation. So one of the things about social justice ed when I was there at UMass as a student, and that I've taken with me throughout my entire life, is spending time on imagining the world as you would like it to be. What does that look like for yourself, right? In your home, in your community, and sort of taking it, beyond that. Because if you don't have an idea in your mind of what's possible, it's very difficult to sustain this level of work and commitment, right? Because where are we headed then, right? Then we're in that anti sort of dynamic rather than the pro-liberation model. And of course, anti-racism is important, but coupled with the pro, like the where are we going and what do we want this to look like? So for me, first and foremost, it's that belief, that idea that we need to have liberation as the process and the goal, right? Like that's what we're trying to get to, so that our humanity is in fact, all the things that we want it to be in terms of respect and love and kindness and all of that. The other piece though is who is going to connect with different audiences and under like what conditions. And I think that looks very different. So there are people like Chris Krass or Paul Kivel. Those are white men who do anti-racism work. They're very involved in standing up for racial justice. If you know Standing Up Surge, Standing Up for Racial Justice, or their work, you should look at it. Paul Kivel's written things about the cost of racism to white people. Chris Krass does workshops all over the country. So if it's really looking for the match of like the messenger that you're going to connect with, I think there's lots of people out there like Robin DiAngelo who are doing the work. I personally also think though, it's really important to seek out and find the authors of color that have been writing about this for so long, the TED Talks, the Instagram accounts, the YouTube channels. There is so much resource out there right now to engage. So like I love Sonia Renee Taylor, for example. I think she does incredible work. She's been doing so much. There's a lot of people that you could point to that are really out there that I would say, they'll be on our book lists. I think they're there, they show up there, that you can seek out. Ibram Kendi's work's been mentioned. There's a children's book that Ibram Kendi wrote about anti-racist baby. That's really, Stamped is a great one. That's another one, right? These are ones that we read here at home, and they're very concrete, action-oriented, easily digestible books. So I would just say, again, pointing back to all the resources that are out there, and then find some people that will come together and talk about them, right? So like do the organizing, the community building and bringing people together, and then start the conversation from there. So the liberation part and then the action part.
And this book is Anti-Racist. That's my favorite. That's like my favorite. I'm reading it right now, and it has a lot of things about like the dominant culture and about how there's been racism in the classroom, and it's really, really amazing. And that's one of my favorite books I'm reading right now. And then I'm reading the one about Trevor Noah.
Yeah, Trevor Noah's autobiography, also really good.
Yeah. Born a Crime, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you all so much. Maria Jose, do you have anything to add in terms of resources for folks on the Zoom?
Yes, I highly recommend that folks visit what we've assembled together as a collective. I think that those are really wonderful places to begin. I'd like to promote the project that I direct with several colleagues at the 5 colleges. It's called the 5 Colleges Doors to the World Project. In many ways, what I've done in this project is I've made my reading practices public because I argue in my work that all books are socially constructed. And so that anything that's been made, socially made, that means a lot of decisions were made in making any text, then as a reader, it is our responsibility to take them apart. So books, we certainly want books that center Black and Indigenous and characters of color. We want books that are created by authors of color. We want, but it's also important to keep in mind that, books are also mirrors of our society. All books, they offer us a snapshot of when they were produced. And so they're mirrors of our society. And if we look at them closely, we get some instances in these texts that give us glimpses of how we are organized in this society. They are also windows in that they offer us a panoramic view and how power is exercised. Kendi talks about power, that it is dynamic, and that, you know, one moment you could be racist and the next moment you could be anti-racist. And so the ways that the choices that we make and the ways we use language, the choices that we make in terms of what we do in the world, these can either promote our anti-racist commitments or they can sabotage. And we see that in books, if we really pay attention to the social processes among the characters. And then books are doors, and doors in the sense that, yes, we are able to glide into these different stories, but also when we learn certain things through our critical engagement with books, then we can take that door into the world, and we'll never be the same, because now we understand, we'll understand a little bit more how race works in this country. And perhaps then that new insight will then help us in our everyday lives. And so I highly recommend that when we think about any kind of text, that we think about that it's all, you know, think about what we use or read, but also how we read it. And we have responsibility in both.
Thank you so much for inviting us to reflect on that. I'm gonna transition now into audience questions. We've been sharing a lot of what, you know, has been brewing over here as we thought collectively about this event, but very urgently, folks have come prepared with some thoughts or have resonated with what you've shared. And I'm just gonna suggest that for each question, because we got quite a list, I'm gonna suggest that just one person answers each question, but, you know, if you wanna answer, just unmute yourself. It's you know, just a suggestion. So I'll begin, and some of them are comments that might just need a response or be helpful to respond to. So the first one is not a question, it's a comment. And it says that many white teachers feel uncomfortable to teach race. And at this attendee school, when George Floyd was killed, they had a discussion and many were uncomfortable, right? So anybody want to respond to that?
Can you repeat it?
Yes. So many white teachers, this is talking about the discomfort of white teachers to teach about race. And this attendee gave the example that when George Floyd was killed, they had a discussion and many were uncomfortable with that discussion. I imagine that it was an interracial space and it was just very awkward. So how do we, you know, I guess the implicit question is around how do we have these conversations around race when white teachers are uncomfortable?
I mean, I guess I'll take a try at that. I mean, I think that practice, right? Like so what's the uncomfortability about? Like, is it that there's not been any space to practice that? Like you haven't had the experience, so then it feels like you're going into uncharted territory. It's a very uncomfortable position for people in authority, teachers, adults, parents, right? To go somewhere where you feel like you may not be the expert, right? And in fact, it's good to know that in advance that you're not, because you're going to be talking about people's lived experiences, right? So I think there's something about making sure that you have practice in like sort of working through that, you know, as we talked about before, the tools that you have that you need to work through your own discomfort, but to actually like tap into that and realize like it's okay to be uncomfortable. Like it's what you do with it, right? So I don't think the goal is that we're never uncomfortable when we're talking about horrible things, or we're talking about, you know, structural racism or people's lives being taken. Of course that's uncomfortable. That's part of your humanity to recognize that. As an educator though, it's then to figure out what are you going to do with that. Not that you know that about yourself. That's not a pass out of the conversation. So I think, yes, uncomfortable requires practice, requires training, requires more information, and lots of comfort with making mistakes and being uncomfortable. That would be my
Yeah, Maria Jose, you want to jump in on that as well?
Yeah, no, thank you, Marcella. And certainly we know too well that that uncomfortableness comes also from inexperience. And so, yeah, we need to do work. We need to, we need to read. We need to ask each other. We need to talk with each other. We need to educate ourselves, and we need to make mistakes. But also, we need to also remember that in schools we have such a culture of niceness. And when we adhere to being nice with each other and not bringing in these topics that are uncomfortable, then we are actually reaffirming the racist structure, systemic racism that has a hold on in these institutions that we work in. So niceness plays a big part in this too.
And if I could chime in too, is just around practice. I want to build on what Marcella was saying about practice. This practice that I was leading and sharing is a practice that we need to begin doing collectively and communally. It turns out that the trauma that's in that teacher's body who doesn't want to talk about it is not only in that teacher's body, it's in all of our bodies, whether our ancestors were the ones committing the trauma, observing it, or receiving it. And I just want to say, the practice teaches us to observe when uncomfortability is in our body. So getting used to when our bodies are getting uncomfortable. And I'll just put a plug in. I put it in the chat here. I've helped curate at UMass Meditates. So every single day of the week, Monday through Friday, at different times during the day, there's an opportunity for us to do these practices collectively. And that is one way we can heal.
Thank you all so much. And just to like tie that all in a little bow, I want to reiterate something that I shared earlier. White comfort is not the priority. It's just not, and in this country for a long time, the priority of white comfort has actually led to a lot of the systemic issues that we're worried about today. So understand that alongside white comfort is the pain and trauma and death that Black, Indigenous, and people of color are carrying with them every day. And so decentering white comfort is a very important part of this work. And so thank you for everything that was shared. I'm going to jump to this question because it comes from a person of color, and I want to center it. It says, coming from, and actually I'm going to try to finesse this and like bring together a couple of questions that are all asking about the influence of TV and media. So coming from a Black family, we work really hard to introduce positive Black images very early on to my niece, who's 4 years old. Yet already we see how she is influenced by TV where whiteness is dominant. She recently said that she wanted Elsa's hair. My family tried to correct it by showing her Black children's books with little girl with hair like hers. And then, so just thinking about that, the fact that they're still coming, getting that dominant white culture coming in. And we have someone else along similar lines, a little different, that's saying that, we're mentioning books, but children spend a lot more time watching TV or they're on their computers. So how do we prioritize representation there, more diverse representation there? And do you feel like the books versus the television or computers are having more influence? How do you navigate that? Or what are your thoughts on that?
I thought Marcella was going to go, but I'm going to just jump in here. I want to promote the idea of reparations. Okay. So we've talked about social justice. We talk about racial justice, but I think this racial reckoning moment now is a talk about reparations, right? So starting, as I mentioned, about the indigenous folks' land, all the treaties that have been denied and shredded need to be enacted. And then all the labor of the African needs to be paid back, okay? And analogy I would like to push forward for thinking about how we do this work and to answer the question directly about media and that sort of thing is to think about this as like a divorce, right? So in a divorce, basically, each party will get half. In this country, up until this point, with white supremacy, white body supremacy, whites have gotten the whole kit and caboodle. So what I'm proposing is, like, in hiring, a lot of corporations are doing this in the wake of George Floyd, is saying, okay, we want half of our employees be BIPOC, people of color. I would say in our university, we need to have faculty, half. And it goes down to the media and representation in Hollywood. We need half of those movies and books, you know, I mean, at minimum, you know. And so we have to get our people in these positions. That's what I think needs to happen.
Thank you so much. And I guess drawing on what was asked here, following on that, like, how do we get to that kind of representation, that half, right? And any other thoughts about, like, Marcella, I don't want to push you to answer if you don't want to answer, but I imagine that folks are curious about your perspectives on the influence of TV versus books, if you don't mind.
I have so much to say. That's the problem. We were like, oh, which thing should we talk about?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a lot. So the princess culture in and of itself really could be its own separate panel. Just the Disney princesses and the infiltration. You know, we talked about when Princess Tiana came out and Aaliyah was little, it was like our gateway into the princess world, like, because Tiana and all her friends, like, we ended up down a rabbit hole. And I think that, you know, there isn't an easy answer here, because this is one of those times where you push back on kids too much and it can become, you know, an act of like defiance or rebellion, right? Like you're pushing and I'm pulling, right? Like then we're sort of in that. So I think that's a caution sometimes that can happen. You know, if Elsa gets too demonized, then, like, you know, it's sort of like Elsa becomes the thing, right? Elsa's hair and everything Elsa. We've lots of Frozen references that we could draw on. Mm-hmm. But I think, to use that specific example, one of the things that we did try to do was complicate even Elsa a little bit, right? So, like, who's Elsa?
Right,
like,
okay, yeah,
right?
So we were in the car on the way home from watching Frozen 2, and we were talking about how Elsa is not just that white princess.
Right, because of her whole backstory.
Because of her mom, because I don't know if anybody has watched Frozen 2, but because of her mom is, her mom's family is from a Native American group that she kept a secret up until this new movie. And basically that means that Elsa and Anna are both like
have indigenous ancestry,
yes,
which was not ever before talked about. Mm-hmm. So there's this whole other narrative if you're willing to engage, right? Again, right? So we talked about that, why that wasn't at all a part of the first movie, because it wasn't actually a thing yet. They hadn't written that second movie. But we talked about Indina Menzel as the lead singer and her social identities in terms of religion and her family, her children. We talked about Frozen on Broadway. They actually cast characters of color in Frozen on Broadway.
Yes.
They had more, you know, freedom to do that on Broadway than in the films, you know, for different reasons. So I guess what I'm saying is, I'm always looking for the where can we connect around what you're interested in and what you're excited about, and then how can we expand that? Right? How can we expand even our understanding around that? You know, so Elsa's hair is a part of the story, but it's not the only part of the story, right? Like, how to expand that. That being said, we do a lot in our house to make sure that there is representation of the people who live here, the children who live here, in the dolls and the media. And we're always talking about when we see, you know, something that we're watching, like, what do you think about this? You know, like, I don't know. There's not that many characters of color. I don't really feel connected or seen, or this is.
Maybe we don't want to watch this today.
Right. Maybe we don't want to watch it today.
Maybe we want to watch Blackish instead.
Right, exactly. So there's ways that we do, to me, it's that kind of that principle of trying to find a connection and then build out from there.
Can we give any other examples?
No. Annie, the 2014 Annie?
Yes, but the hair episode of Mixed-ish.
Yeah, do you want to talk about that?
Well, I mean, I watched it like a year ago, so I don't remember that much, but I just remember that in it, one of the main characters' aunt took them to go to the hair salon instead of having their hair done at home. And when they went to the hair salon, it took a very long time, but they got their hair straightened. and then there was a hair episode of Blackish too, where Diane had gotten her hair straightened for a very long time, for her whole life, and then one day she decided to go with a natural hairstyle, and she decided to go with box braids. And that was another hair episode of one of those two. But I remember watching those, like it was about picture day, and yeah.
Good conversations to be had.
Yes, thank you. Aaliyah, you're my new favorite person. She's like, I want to watch that today. And absolutely, because I completely forgot that in Frozen 2. I'm like, they stole that indigenous land. Like they stole. I realized, and that's beautiful. Thinking about the nuances, and even if you are not watching it today, and you watch it tomorrow, having those critical conversations about what's missing or what needs to be complicated. So thank you all so much for those examples. I'm going to jump in. We got about 5 more minutes, so I'm going to throw out a few more questions. What would panelists recommend beyond representative literature for teaching white children in white schools about race and racism who have not had many interactions with people of color and have the foundation of racism/racial silence at home from their parents? Anyone feel free to answer. Nothing?
I mean, the only thing that comes to mind for me is that this movement to bring about racial equity in this country is going to have to be led by white people on some level. Like white folks are going to have to step up and teach other white people. It's not going to be some Black messiah who goes to these neighborhoods and trains everybody and teaches everybody. So white people who live in those areas that are so disconnected from folks of color, they are going to have to step up and take leadership and do that type of educational role.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you so much. Maria Jose.
Go ahead, Dr. J. Finish your thought.
Well, no. It was actually going to segue into the next question. So go ahead.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and I think that just again, allowing students to ask questions about where they live. Why is it a homogeneous school? Why is it a homogeneous, neighborhood? And to really, to just wonder about all of these things. And it's not just because it just happens. And I think that by poking at these questions as inquiries, it can then help people understand, the students understand, how racism works, and that they're living racism in their own, neighborhood.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you so much for those insights. And I know that those are really important starting points. And that actually segues into what I'll make the last question. I'll try to lump some things together. Finesse it a little bit one more time. But so there are a lot of questions, several questions that are asking about initiating this kind of dialogue or conversations with folks, right? Like, so for example, there are people who came on this call earlier. I shared that folks who showed up tonight show up because we know that there's very much a systemic racism problem in our world, for the most part. And then, but the people in everyone's lives, in our lives, don't necessarily know that, right? But we know that we have people in our families, we have friends, we have colleagues who need to be in these conversations. And so how do we initiate that? Like, how do we initiate those kinds of conversations for the people in our world so that they can know that this is not neutral and that there needs to be room for advocating and engaging in the kind of change we all need collectively?
Well, I think that one of the things, first of all, I just want to say, this is the last question, thank you so much for your facilitation and your, just like brilliant. I mean, not surprising at all. You know, it was just brilliant. So complex, so many things, but still like flowing and feeling really digestible. So thank you. I was
just gonna say that, and digestible bits.
Digestible bits.
Like tater tots.
Like tater tots. Yes.
Thank you.
I love it. So I just like, I guess the thing that I would say about like engaging in the conversation, I don't mean to sound impatient, but I feel like you need to kind of just go do it. Like just start somewhere. You know, this summer, one of the things I did is I put out a call on a dance, so like dance parents and caregivers are on like a Facebook group. And I just said, hey, does anybody want to get together, you know, and talk about how to talk to kids about race? And it turned into like a 5-week thing where we met up once a week. And, you know, I brought all my SJE resources that I had to the table, but I was just really committed, like, let's just do it and let's put ourselves out there and let's share what you're struggling with and see how, you know, we can help each other and sort of get past whatever it is. And I'm a busy person. I don't have a lot of extra time. It wasn't like I was sitting around thinking, what could I do? You know, I just took a leap. And so I guess I would say that on a lot of this, it's about the relationships you already have. You already have a sphere of influence of people that are around you who will engage with you if you invite them in. And so I think just being willing to do that and activate those circles. Do you want to say anything else?
I would just like to say that even though online school is pretty great, better than last year, this was way more fun than being on my meeting for an hour and a half. So.
I love it.
Awesome.
I love it.
We're winning. Yes. I love it. Thank you so much. You're the best.
I just wanted to build on that. Yes, definitely spheres of influence, those relationships. And much like the examples that you were sharing, Aaliyah and Marcella, but just also just like your everyday lives together as a family, as friends, and the kinds of things that come up, you know, whether you're watching, you know, a show and then a commercial comes on that is so problematic, and then to name that, or whether you are, you know, reading and you're reading the newspaper and again addressing something that comes up in the newspaper. So the everyday life that we live is to just bring up those issues of racism, instances of racism that are important for us to talk about, and then certainly, you know, make our commitments public all the time.
Absolutely, and that's real. And I'll remind us also that this was asked broadly, but across racial lines, there are different stakes when we do this, right? What's being invited here, right? When you're a white person that's initiating this kind of conversation with folks versus a person of color in a professional setting, especially, right? There are different stakes that come along with having that kind of courage or vulnerability or whatever it's needed at that time. Nat Turner, do you want to drop some wisdom on us about how do we initiate these kind of conversations beyond the scope of the people who had the good sense to join the Zoom?
Absolutely, absolutely. My point is very similar to what I said just a second ago, but for my white colleagues out there, for my white brothers and sisters, call in your brethren, your kinfolks. You don't need to call them out as racist and call all that sort of thing, but just call them in and work with them, teach them, share with them, love them. And that's how we'll get this done. You know what I mean? Call in your family.
Woo! Just dropping, ending with the gem and the note of love, which is often a forgotten piece of this very important conversation. Thank you so much. Thank you for your brilliance. Thank you for everything that you've brought. Thank you to those of you who showed up and who are about to go and change the spaces, your spheres of influence, so that we have a better world and our future. There's a better world to inherit. Just very grateful to you. Know also that this is going to be recorded. So another passive aggressive move is that you can share this link with somebody to initiate a conversation. Like, check that out. We're just grateful to have you here. Please check out Following Up for resources and these videos online. Thank you all and have a beautiful, beautiful evening. Bye.